I'm Jennifer, and you're listening to the Florida Gardener Podcast. Real quick before we get into it, if you enjoy the podcast, could you please consider leaving a review? My hope is to reach more folks and grow the channel. Leaving a positive review helps to do just that. Thanks so much in advance. Okay, so like many folks, I too have impulsively purchased the Venus flytrap in a small clear plastic box. The big box garden centers tend to keep them on a rack near the checkout area. So last summer, I decided to take the carnivorous plant game much more serious. I purchased 9 different carnivorous plants, along with a specialty blend soil and mineral-free water. I created mini bog gardens using some old plastic containers and kept the plants outside in an area where they would see bright light. Ultimately, some died and some survived. I made mistakes like overfeeding my Venus flytrap, but I also learned a ton. It turns out you don't need to feed your carnivorous plants bugs at all. Yep, you heard me. And if you're not drilling side overflow holes in the container, so your bog garden doesn't flood like mine did, keep your plants shielded from the elements on a porch or patio, or maybe just go with an aquatic carnivorous plant. Yes, we'll talk about those today. Anyway, this experience only fueled my interest and curiosity in these wild, alien-like plants. I needed to know more, which is why we are here today. I'm not a carnivorous plant expert. I'm a passionate, amateur hobbyist. So take this episode with a grain of salt. The carnivorous plant world is vast and wide. We are only scratching the surface here. Florida is actually home to more species of carnivorous plants than any other state in the U.S. Carnivorous plants occur throughout Florida, but the best place to see them in the wild is in the northern half of our state. The Panhandle is a carnivorous plant haven. However, they can also be found in Central and South Florida. There are 4 types of carnivorous plants native to Florida: pitcher plants, sundews, Butterworts, and Bladderworts. They occur in moist areas with acidic, nutrient-poor soil like bogs, savannas, and wet pinelands. Now, fun fact, the Venus flytrap, arguably the most popular carnivorous plant, is not native to Florida. It's only native to the Carolinas. According to North Carolina State University, while Venus flytraps have been planted and naturalized in other areas, they only occur naturally within a 75-mile radius around Wilmington, North Carolina. This area is primarily in North Carolina, but it also includes a few South Carolina counties. What's even more interesting is, according to carnivorousplants.org, the majority of what Venus flytraps eat in the wild are beetles, not flies. Unless, of course, you're an aquatic Venus flytrap. Yep, the Venus flytrap has an underwater cousin called the Waterwheel, and it uses its snap traps to clamp down on aquatic invertebrates and sometimes even small fish and tadpoles. And get this, according to BBC, the Waterwheel snaps its trap shut 10 times faster than the Venus flytrap. Now, not all carnivorous plants have an active snap trap like the Venus flytrap. Some traps are semi-active and others are passive, like a pitfall trap, but the goal is always the same: feed the beast. Okay, now that I've blown your mind, let's talk about the various trapping mechanisms and how they differ from one another. Because it's the one that we're all probably most familiar with, let's discuss snap traps first. So think the Venus flytrap, right? But also the lesser-known Waterwheel, which we already discussed, the underwater cousin of the Venus flytrap. So these are active traps, right? The modified leaves on a Venus flytrap have tiny little hairs that detect movement and clamp down when a fly or gnat lands on the modified leaf. Or if you're the Waterwheel, when you detect something like a crustacean perhaps, or a small tadpole. So once it clamps down, it sort of looks like a mouth, a clamshell. The Venus flytrap produces digestive enzymes that kick in from there and start breaking down the tasty prey. The Venus flytrap, at least in the wild, catches more ants, beetles, and other crawling things than flies. That just really blew my mind. And according to the National Wildlife Federation, it can take a Venus flytrap 3 to 5 days to digest an organism, and it may go months between meals. That was one of the mistakes I made. I was feeding it things that were too big, and I was also overfeeding it. You don't want to mess around with these modified leaves and stick your fingers in there. I know kids especially like to do that, but each modified leaf or snap trap, whatever you want to call it, only closes and opens so many times before it dies. So you'll actually end up hurting the plant if you do that. Now, with that being said, they have evolved to become pretty good at detecting what's food and what's not. Now, if you keep putting your finger in there, that is going to confuse it. But out in the wild, like if plant debris or a raindrop, for example, hits the inside of the trap, it won't shut. And that's because the Venus flytrap has its own internal timer, so to speak. So if a plant leaf or piece of even dust brushes up against a trigger hair, it ignores it. There has to be constant movement. A second hair must be touched within about 20 seconds. Then it'll clamp down. And it has to be on a different trigger hair. It can't brush up against the exact same hair. Now, something else that I did want to touch on with the Venus flytrap is the reason why we don't have them naturally occurring in Florida. They have become naturalized in the northern part of our state, like in the Panhandle. But the reason why we don't have them anywhere else is because they require a period of dormancy. That's critical to understand because so many of us feel like we're failing with them, but they need a winter dormancy. And if you don't live in an area that can provide that, it's not going to work out unless you're tricking them into dormancy. There are ways to do that using your fridge. But yeah, I think that's where sometimes we are led astray with these guys. And that's why, after doing this whole experiment and growing all of these carnivorous plants, I have decided, spoiler, the Venus flytrap is actually my least favorite carnivorous plant for Florida gardeners. And if you want to know which one is my favorite that I would actually highly recommend, you'll just have to stick around and listen to the rest of this episode. Okay, so let's move away from snap traps, and now we're going to discuss sticky traps. So Butterworts and Sundews are two examples of plants that have sticky traps. Sometimes they're also referred to as adhesive traps. The leaves on these plants produce a glue-like mucus and insects get stuck. And the best way to kind of think about this is if you've ever used that sticky yellow flypaper to catch fungus gnats around your houseplants, this is essentially what adhesive traps do. With sticky traps, some are semi-active and others are passive. Sundews look pretty wild. They have these long leaves that sort of look like tentacles, like something you would find underwater. They're usually burgundy in color, and they're covered in this sticky dew that helps to attract and catch the bugs, right? They end up sticking to it. Butterworts, on the other hand, look like a small, round succulent. They produce a rosette leaf arrangement, and the leaves look flat and fleshy. Same deal. They produce sweet, sticky digestive juices on the surface of their leaves, and the bugs are attracted to this. As they are trying to feed, they end up getting stuck on this sticky dew, and then the enzymes kick in, and they end up being broken down and digested. When it comes to all carnivorous plants, they eat the soft inner fluids of the insect, and they leave behind the exoskeleton, which is more difficult to break down. Now, something else about carnivorous plants that I thought was interesting is they'll use visual cues to attract prey. This is why so many are vibrant red, purple, even yellow. It's supposed to help capture the bug's attention and draw them in. Oftentimes, they'll think it's a flower, or maybe they're just curious because that plant stands out. Now, back to sticky traps. Some of them are semi-active. According to Curious Plant, Carnivorous Plant Nursery, once a bug is trapped, some species will begin to curl their leaves around it. This curling action introduces additional dew to ensure the prey doesn't escape. It also causes more of the leaf surface to come in contact with the bug as the sundew prepares for digestion. Carnivorous plants capture bugs in lots of different ways, which we are in the middle of discussing, but it seems like they all digest bugs the same way. The plant releases enzymes and acids to break down the prey into usable nutrients, which it then absorbs. Now, the thing I like about sundews and butterworts, it's really simple to see if they caught anything. You don't really have to do any inspecting. I could just walk out and clearly see if a gnat was stuck to my sundew plant. And it seems like they have a really high success rate. Small bugs, especially gnats, were constantly stuck on my sundew and butterwort plant. So they aren't going hungry, that's for sure. Now we are moving on to suction traps. Bladderworts are the most popular carnivorous plant in this category. And fun fact, bladderworts are the most abundant carnivorous plant in Florida. So out of the 4 different types of carnivorous plants we have, bladderworts are the most common. Now, most bladderworts are aquatic. They float in lakes, swamps, and ponds, but we also have some terrestrial species. Florida is home to 14 species of aquatic bladderworts. They're these submersed, free-floating plants that don't have any roots. They have tiny bladders attached to their underwater leaves that trap and digest tiny animals. According to BBC Earth, sugar hairs on the surface of its bladders are tripped when prey float by. As the bladder opens, water rushes in, bringing the prey with it. This all occurs in less than a millisecond. Now, another interesting thing about bladderworts is they produce bright, tall flowers. According to UF IFAS, bladderwort flowers are usually bright yellow, but sometimes lavender depending on the species. The flowers have 2 lip-like petals of about equal size. Flowers are on long stalks that emerge several inches above the water. So if I was to describe what they look like above the water, each bladderwort is a little bit different, but the swollen bladderwort, for example, so envision kind of like this spoke and wheel situation. You have the flower stalk in the center, and then you have 5 thin stems that shoot out from that flower spike. It is a free-floating plant, but it kind of helps to keep it stabilized, and underneath it is where all the action is. When they pull it up out of the water, it almost just looks like a clump of like green seaweed. It's like a fine mesh with lots of little bladder traps on it. And, when it's in the water, you can imagine they're all kind of like floating out and around. But when you pull it up out of the water, it's just like this clump of delicate, lacy, seaweed-looking stuff is the best way I can describe it. Something that I didn't fully appreciate before doing this whole experiment: carnivorous plants are adapted to nutrient-poor conditions. While you'll read that you're not supposed to feed them fertilizer, there's not a lot of nitrogen in the soil that they naturally grow in. So they have adapted to get their nitrogen and other nutrients from insects. But they aren't surviving on this alone, and they don't need to be fed daily. I heard someone say this, and it just totally clicked for me. Bugs are the equivalent of a vitamin or like a supplement for a carnivorous plant. They photosynthesize just like all our other plants. They need light, they need water. Their diet does not consist primarily of insects. If you have your carnivorous plants outside, you probably don't need to feed them at all. Okay. So now we're going to move on to my favorite category of carnivorous plants. And this category also includes my ride or die, the one that is still with me today, has survived it all. Carnivorous plants that fall into this category have pitfall traps. Plants with pitfall traps include pitcher plants and even some bromeliads. Nepenthes pitcher plants are my ultimate favorite. They're a tropical pitcher plant. They just are really unique and unusually shaped. They're wild, something you totally see in a tropical rainforest. And some species can get really big, like large enough to eat a lizard, frog, or even a small rodent. Nepenthes pitcher plants, if you look them up, people are going to say that they are really high maintenance. These people probably don't live in Florida. They are a tropical pitcher plant. They need really warm, humid conditions. So yes, if you're trying to grow this in another part of our country, it is going to be a high maintenance plant. But for Floridians, especially if you're in Central and South Florida, I couldn't recommend this guy enough. The largest carnivorous plant in the world is Nepenthes Rajah, which is a giant pitcher plant. According to azanimals.com, the pitcher traps on this plant can grow to be up to 16.1 inches tall. The pitcher has the capacity to hold 9 gallons of fluid. Yes, you heard that right. 9 gallons. I wish I could remember which Nepenthes I have. I think it might be Nepenthes Miranda, but really you can't go wrong with any of the tropical pitcher plants. The pitchers on mine do get pretty big, not as big as Rajah, but they can get to about as long as my hand. Now, for the record, we have a lot of native pitcher plants in North America and even in Florida. A lot of the tropical pitcher plants are from Southeast Asia. We don't have any native Nepenthes in Florida. In the wild, many of these guys grow as climbing vines, reaching 45 feet in surrounding trees. and some are even epiphytes attaching directly to the trees. The pitcher plants that are naturally found in Florida are more terrestrial. They're really beautiful in a diverse group all in their own. I have grown some of the North American pitcher plants. So the tropical pitcher plants grow a little bit different than our native ones. The best way to keep them in your garden is in a hanging basket, in my opinion, because in the rainforests, they're really long climbing vines. Placing them in a hanging basket just really allows them to be able to do their thing and shows them off, and they just look really beautiful. So I have mine in a nice large hanging basket attached on a shepherd's hook, and I have it positioned in my garden to receive morning sun and natural rainfall. They're just really hardy and forgiving carnivorous plants for Floridians, and don't require a winter rest. With a lot of the other ones, especially Venus flytraps, some of these guys do require winter dormancy. This could mean digging them up and placing them in your fridge to mimic natural conditions, depending on where you live. So let's talk a little bit more about the pitchers on Nepenthes. They often have a really beautiful burgundy color, and the pitcher itself is vase-shaped or an urn-shaped cup. Tropical ones hang down, and that's why they work so well in a hanging basket. The cool thing about the way that the pitchers on these plants develop, what happens is they grow the leaves, and then at the tip of the leaf, you'll notice that it develops like a little tendril. And then the tendril ends up developing into a pitcher. It's this slow, gradual process. It starts with a leaf, then you'll notice like this little tendril at the tip of the leaf, and then you'll see a baby little pitcher, and that pitcher grows and grows, and then finally opens. I was told that you need to fill the pitchers with water. I don't necessarily feel like this is true, especially if you have it in a place where it's receiving natural rainfall, but then also creates its own liquid, which helps entice insects and then also break them down. So in my opinion, it doesn't really need your help. You don't need to do anything. I've actually seen bugs floating in the water of my Nepenthes. It's super cool. Now, fun fact about Nepenthes Rajah, this specific Nepenthes is commonly known as monkey cups because primates have been observed drinking from the leaves when thirsty. And according to BBC Earth, this plant has also developed an unusual symbiotic relationship with the local mountain shrew. The shrew feeds on the plant's nectar and then defecates into the pitcher, providing it with much needed nitrogen. So we've talked a lot about the tropical pitcher plants. I do want to touch on the Cobra lily, which is more of like a traditional terrestrial pitcher plant. This one is super neat because, hence the name, Cobra lily. It actually has a round bulbous head that points downward. It really looks like a cobra's head. Now, this guy is found in Northern California and Oregon mountain steeps. It likes cool alpine water. It doesn't tolerate Florida temperatures, so I wouldn't suggest purchasing this one. But they're just really unique. Now, it also has these fang-like structures that grow out of its head. So it kind of looks like snake fangs. And then it also does things a little bit different when it comes to trapping its victims. So it's a pitfall trap. It does have that. But what makes this pitcher plant extra interesting, it has glands in those fang-like structures that secrete sugary nectar that flies and other insects feed on. It kind of like lures them in that way. And then once it does that, the Cobra lily has another trick up its sleeve. Once the insect gets inside, it becomes disoriented because of transparent light shining on the top of the dome. So the Cobra lily also uses what is considered a light trap. The top of its head or hood has like a lot of translucent areas on top of it. So the poor insects, they keep trying to fly upward thinking that they can leave. It looks like a translucent window. They get tricked and they get tired from attempting to get out, and they end up falling down the tube. The tube is covered with hairs, which prevents the insect from climbing back out. And at that point, they're so exhausted anyway that they give up and drown in the pool of water at the base, and then they're devoured. Now, I also wanted to touch on bromeliads because some bromeliads are actually carnivorous plants that use pitfall traps. According to carnivorousplantnursery.com, there are several carnivorous bromeliads. They work in a similar manner as pitcher plants, with the hollows of the leaf clusters acting like a pitfall trap with slippery, waxy leaves. Carnivorous bromeliads look like almost any other bromeliad. Earlier, it was believed that they do not secrete digestive enzymes and that bacterial decomposition was the digestive process. However, in 2006, B.J. Planchno proved that certain bromeliad species do indeed secrete digestive enzymes and absorb the nutrients. It's a wild world out there when it comes to carnivorous plants. After doing this experiment last summer and caring for different carnivorous plants, with the exception of aquatic, here are my top takeaways. So, number one, carnivorous plants are not houseplants. And yes, I do understand that it's possible to successfully keep them inside. You can do grow lights, have this whole terrarium set up. But for your average person just looking to pick up a plant and not do all that, just get one that thrives outdoors where you live and keep it outside. Number two, the Venus flytrap is my least favorite carnivorous plant. So mainly because I find them to be high maintenance, but also because they're so common and there's just a vast world of carnivorous plants to explore. Number three, live prey, it's not the main meal, and overfeeding them can do more harm than good. Carnivorous plants derive most of their energy from photosynthesis. Now, I want to go over some carnivorous care tips. They all pretty much like similar conditions, with the exception of the bladderworts. When it comes to aquatic carnivorous plants, that's a little bit different. These plant care tips are from Pinder's Nursery in Palm City, Florida. So, number one, carnivorous plants love bright light. Outdoors, give them 4 to 6 hours of direct sun. Indoors, place them in the sunniest window or under a grow light. Like I said, I don't care to keep mine indoors, but go for it if you want. When it comes to outdoors, they do love direct sun, but I would not give them afternoon direct sun. So just keep that in mind. Number two, use only rainwater, distilled, or reverse osmosis water. Tap water can harm them. Keep soil consistently moist, never let it dry out. The only thing I will say is occasionally I do give my tropical pitcher tap water and it's totally fine. Once again, it's in an area where it can receive natural rainfall, so it's not totally relying on me, but I would say that's really good advice. A lot of the salts and stuff in our water are not great for carnivorous plants. Number three, plant in a special mix of peat moss and sand or perlite. Avoid fertilizers and never use regular potting soil. It's too rich and will kill them. Great advice. Sometimes I'll mix in pine bark, like orchid mix, into the carnivorous mix. Specifically, my tropical pitcher seems to be fine with that. It just seems to be a much more flexible carnivorous plant. But these are plants, you guys, that do really benefit from just do things the right way, get the special blend from your nursery. Oftentimes I'll talk about how things are overhyped or it's not that big of a deal. But with carnivorous plants, you really do want to mimic their natural conditions as best you can. And number four, no fertilizer needed. Carnivorous plants get nutrients from insects. They also make a note that in winter, many carnivorous plants go dormant, reduce watering, but keep the soil damp. But also, once again, if they're not able to get a true winter dormancy, sometimes they don't end up doing well. In my opinion, if you live in the southern part of our state, don't get carnivorous plants that require a true winter rest, and you'll be just fine. Okay, that was a lot of information. I hope I did okay. I'm oddly passionate about this group of plants. They're just so unique and provide so much fun, interesting character to the garden. I'm not trying to take anything away from the Venus flytrap because that's the gateway carnivorous plant for many of us, myself included. There are just so many to explore and learn about. So I hope this gets you jazzed up. Usually the best time to find these guys at your nursery is in the summer. So scoot out there this weekend and pick yourself up some. There are also tons of online providers of carnivorous plants. Try to find a reputable nursery because there is some poaching going on. But yes, there are also online options if you don't have any nearby. All right, so that wraps up episode 35 of The Florida Gardener. We'll be back soon for episode 36. In the meantime, if you'd like to subscribe to my free newsletter, take a look at my online garden shop, or check out my social. You can access everything via my website, rootsredefined.com. That's roots, R-O-O-T-S, redefined, R-E-D-E-F-I-N-E-D.com. All right, thanks guys. I'll see you again soon.